Hey everybody, it's Kneecap here, and in this video we're going to be talking about the new Mega Dungeon, Dawn of the Infinite, coming out in patch 10.1.5, and its difficulty, the type of gear it gives, and a whole discussion on this, right? So, on this Wowhead article that I'm on right now, they talk about how currently on the PTR, this dungeon is tuned to be fairly difficult for like a 425 item level player, which is what they are scaled to on the PTR. Now, of course, if you are like a high end player or even like a heroic raider, stuff like that, I struggle to define what a high end player is sometimes. But even if you're like a heroic raider, you do like level plus 12 to 16 keys, stuff like that. Like you're going to be probably over geared for this dungeon when it comes to live. But the point of this is that it's very well tuned and the mechanics are very similar to like raiding mechanics more than dungeon mechanics, where sometimes dungeons can have hard mechanics for sure, but a lot of times in dungeons the mechanics are easier to deal with, or sometimes even more gimmicky in a mega dungeon that they've made before. And so it felt similar to raid mechanics is basically what this article is saying. I can link the article in the description below if you care to read through it. But basically what I want to talk about is this being kind of like a 5-man raid. Now, this is something that I have talked about on this channel. If you are a hardcore follower of this channel, not just like the ret stuff or not just the guides, this is something I've talked about a lot, is making these mega dungeons as an opportunity to kind of be almost like a mini raid, a 5-man raid. And this is kind of seeming what this kind of is going to be. Now, of course, with the fact that most people will probably overgear it, based on what this guy is saying about the tuning. Not most people, but most people who really care about their gear are going to overgear this. It's not going to be a super difficult challenge, but it still will probably be somewhat difficult, right? If everything is saying is true with all of the it's not in this article, but the last boss on here, the last boss hadn't been tested when they wrote this article. The last boss took this guy 11 minutes to kill, I think, which is obviously really long. But of course, like I said, you might have more gear when you go into it. So, but let's talk more about the discussion about this more than just specifically this dungeon, right? So the discussion is 5-man like raid content. And is that something that they should do? And are these mega dungeons like the perfect way to do it? I've always thought so. I've always suggested this. I've always suggested that the loot from these should then also be commiserate and very strong. Now, as of now, that is the case with the loot, I believe, being 437. And that's just below mythic level of loot for just this dungeon on mythic difficulty. So like mythic 0, because it's not a key yet, it drops like 437 item level. And then there's also a heroic version. I'm not sure if there's a normal version as well, but there is a heroic version of it as well. So you can actually tune down the difficulty and tune down the gear a little bit. I think that's great too. So why is this cool? Now, I think this would be a lot better if it was like at the start of an expansion, right? If they came out with maybe with every patch, literally you come out with a mega dungeon and a raid. I know that'd be a lot of work, but a mega dungeon and a raid, allowing people to progress 5-man content or 20-man content on mythic or heroic or normal difficulty, just like the raid. And then you could even have an LFR version of this dungeon, right, with the commiserate eye level of gear. I think that'd be really cool. There's a lot of people that want to play in smaller group sizes, that want to play with their friends, their close friends, more than, and I say close friends because when you are in a guild, you end up, especially if you are working for the same goals and everything like that, you end up friends with your guildmates a lot of times. And so, a group of 20 people raiding together can be, 90% friends in a way, at least. So, but there's some people that aren't like that just want to play with their close personal friends, and 5 is a lot easier to do that with. And so I've always kind of pushed for this content. I think it's really cool. I think the gear, of course, has to be lower item level than the 20-man version, like a 20-man raid, right? Or a 30-man raid for heroic or whatever. Like, it needs to be lower than that because, you want to incentivize the group content, the big group content more, obviously. And obviously, putting 20 bodies together is harder than putting 5 bodies together. So there should be more reward for that, in my opinion, than just putting 5 bodies together. But the loot still should be quite good, right? I'm perfectly fine with a 5-man mythic mega dungeon tuned appropriately, having that loot be, you know, kind of like end of heroic item level, heroic raid, and then like having, you know, heroic dungeon, the mega dungeon, end of dungeon, like the last boss or whatever, or all the bosses, whatever, being similar to like the end of normal and stuff like that, and having like these actually steps in between. So if you're a heroic raid guild that can't quite get your feet into mythic or fully into mythic, and right now it's very interesting. I think when I looked, there was like 3,300 guilds that have killed at least 3 bosses in the mythic raid, and it's really not till a shock until you get to a really hard boss. And so but it's still like just killing 3 is still pretty good, because yes, the first boss is pretty easy, especially because they nerfed it, and then Assault of Zakali is pretty easy, but like the Forgotten Experiments and Amalgamation Chamber, those at least take some like planning and some thought and stuff to do. So the fact that they've at least killed one of those 2 shows that that's actually pretty good. And I was very surprised by that, and I guess I never really looked into it, but that means that there's like 60,000 plus players that are mythic rating, which I never thought it would be that high, but that is the case, I guess. But you know, maybe those guilds can't get past those 3 bosses, but they can go farm gear and just do this dungeon and get like really cool gear from this dungeon. And they're kind of like filling in that gap between heroic. They're better than heroic. Maybe they're not quite good enough for mythic. Or, you know, on the lower difficulty, they're better than normal, but they're not quite good enough for heroic, so they do like the heroic dungeon version. I've always thought having these intermediate steps is actually a good thing, especially when it's not more raid difficulties. I've never thought the answer was more raid difficulties. You know, having a mega heroic and then a mythic and then like a super mythic for only like 5 guilds. You know, I never thought like those were the answers. I always saw it, you know, supplementing it with this 5-man style raid. It could be a 10-man raid too, that would be fine. But like this 5-man mega dungeon raid would be really cool. I really hope that this is what they are going for with this. I hope it's not like going to be majorly tuned down and the gear majorly nerfed down alongside of it. But like that's what I really hope for, because it's really cool. It's important too to mention too. Someone like me, I'm kind of an aberration of a mythic raider, you know, someone with a family and other things, and like, yeah, I make videos, but I kind of do it as a hobby, and like like I don't play the game nearly as much as like the people around me play the game, I guess I'd say. So I can never really keep an alt geared. I can just keep my main character geared, and I cannot really keep an alt geared very well. But having this dungeon takes someone who has the skill to do it, but maybe not the time, and allows that person, whether it's on their alt or their main, to kind of gear up their character. So imagine yourself, if you are a person who can't play that much, you can't set aside 6 hours a week to raid, the guaranteed time, or 9 hours or however long to raid, and instead you get almost the best gear by just doing these cool 5-man dungeons that are tuned to be difficult and progression and kind of cool like that. And typically mega dungeons have been very good, so I'm kind of like assuming this dungeon's going to be cool, because all the other mega dungeons have been pretty cool when they come out. So like, I just think there's so many positives to this. I would really love to see this kind of be a way that they do things going forward. And like I said, I think it would be a lot more effective if this track of progression was out at the beginning of an expansion, right? So you go into the new raid, you have a mega dungeon, you know, that is basically like a 5-man raid, and then you have all the other content that you would normally do, but like you have this 5-man option to kind of gear your character for. And I think that would be really, really helpful to a lot of players who end up dropping out when they're like, oh, I have to farm even more Mythic Pluses, and then I have to, and then the timer, I hate the timer on the Mythic Pluses. You know, there's something about not having to do a timer that makes like, because you're like, well, you could just do a plus 20 and get gear that way. But like, there's a timer to it. It's more stressful. You can just plan to do this 5-man dungeon with your friends or whatever. And like just be like, hey, we're gonna set aside this time, you know, you can reserve loot or whatever, because I assume it's, you know, it's boss by boss drop loot instead of a chest at the end, and like things like that just make it a little bit more cool in my opinion. I'm 100% for this. In this article, I actually thought it was a moment of clarity actually by the author here, where they they actually wanted to like tune down players instead of tuning up the dungeon more. Because like I said, they said it's tuned well for 425. A lot of high end players are 440 plus, so it's going to probably feel a lot like this dungeon might feel a little bit easy to a player like me. Maybe not though, but it could. And to tune down the players, I totally disagree with that. And I definitely disagree with having the dungeon be so hard that only like, you know, whatever, 1,000, 10,000 players can accomplish it, right? I want this dungeon to be accomplished by pretty much anyone who can do heroic level rating, maybe that they do heroic level rating, or they could if they had time to do it, right? I would want this dungeon on Mythic to be accomplished by everybody like that. On Heroic, I'd want it to be able to be accomplished by pretty much everybody, as long as they're willing to put the time in to finish it, right? If you're a really bad player, maybe the Heroic version takes you a long time to complete, and it's kind of a slog, but you get some really cool gear from it, and like you feel really accomplished when you finish it. I think that should kind of be the template going forward. You use these mythic dungeons, these mega dungeons, as kind of a step between raids, and of course then you would have to release one with every tier. I know that's more work. It's easy to give other people more work, but that's where I am on this. So if you care to read the article, like I said, I will link it in the description below, so you can actually read through the article if you care about it. But yeah, I wanted to get my thoughts on this because it's something I've talked about a lot, and now this is the first time where they're kind of looking like, at least it's not out yet, but it's kind of looking like they are doing something that I've suggested. And so, hopefully that's the case, and we'll see how it works out. Maybe it'll be terrible, maybe nobody will like it, and then my idea is stupid, or maybe it is a very big hit, and they can make it better by doing some of the things I suggested that they do. And, it could be like a new great thing going forward, a new piece of content in the game where they release a mega dungeon with every single patch. I think that'd be so cool. So that's it for this one, guys. As always, I do ask you to please subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a lot. Other than that, everybody, have a good one.